Welcome to our very first WCAT Fireside Chat for the Lucius Beebe Memorial Library. We have been doing our beach reads for over 4 years now at the library, and many of you have requested that we start doing more book talks, and we decided that it would be a great partnership to do it with WCAT so more of you could see and hear what we have to say about books, because talking about books is one of the things we love doing more than anything else. We will do it at the desks and the stacks. We've been known to do it walking to the library or coming back from the post office. And it's something that we do on a regular basis. We also have a great many different ways to access this information on our website, www.wakefieldlibrary.org. We'll have all the book lists that we're going to be talking about. Each of them will be by our names so that you can look them up according to who spoke this evening. And you'll be able to find whatever you need in PDF form or something that's linked to the catalog. So joining me this evening is Jeff Clapes, who's the head of our reference department, Karen Stern, who's another reference librarian. This is Beth Radcliffe, also on our reference team, and Christy Lockhart, who is the head of our circulation services. And I'm Leanne Ellis, a Reader's Advisory and Reference Librarian. And we also have a variety of other services you may not be aware of. We do something called the Reader's Advisory Questionnaire, and that is online, and you are allowed to fill it out, give it to us, and then after 10 days, we will get back to you. We like to collaborate on this, and we give you 5 phenomenal authors' titles that you can walk away with. So if you really, truly do not know what to read, come to us and we will help you find something. This will also give you a lovely reservoir of books to go to when you have the time to read them. The other thing that we do that you may not be aware of is that we also have we will do whatever you need for book groups. We give you resources, we'll give you questions, we'll also suggest book titles for you to read. So anything to do with reading, come to our reference desk, we'll be happy to talk to you about it. And then Jeff is going to start by talking about some nice warm places.
Some of you may know me as the traveling librarian because I do love traveling, and I also love to do travel photography, and I do travel lectures at the library. And because of this, I tend to be drawn to books that have a very strong sense of place. And by that, I mean books where the author puts enough information about the geographic location into the story so that it becomes really crucial to the storyline, and so that the place actually almost becomes like a character in the story. So my list this year is a list of recommendations, both fiction and nonfiction, that have to do with books that have a strong sense of place, but in particular that are warm, because if anyone was out today, you know exactly why I like warm books. The idea is to make you feel toasty in the middle of winter. So my first talk today is a narrative nonfiction book called Olive Odyssey, The Secrets, what did I say? Searching for the Secrets of the Fruit That Seduced the World. This was published in 2014 by Julie Angus. This is a wonderful book, in particular for foodies, but it's also really good for anyone who sort of appreciates the siren song of the Mediterranean and all of the history and the cultures that surround that area. I have a particular fondness for olives because my Greek grandmother is from Kalamata in the Peloponnese, and that's where the world's best olives come from. Not that I'm biased.
So he says.
But they are the best. Anyway, so Julie Angus was in a completely different part of her life. She was the first woman to ever row across the Atlantic Ocean from continent to continent. She's kind of an adventurer. And she and her husband Colin also did a trip a few years ago where they bicycled, and it was bicycles and boats only. They went from the very northern tip of Scotland all the way down to Syria, using only either boats or bicycles on rivers and lakes and so forth. Anyway, the connection to Syria is important because Angus's family, or part of her family, lives in the area where Turkey and Syria border each other, and they grow olives and make olive oil. So that was what prompted them to take the trip that this book is based on, which was in 2011. So she and her husband traveled the Mediterranean in a rented sailboat, and they went west to east to research the history of this fruit that forms the basis of so many of the world's cuisines. They sailed with their 10-month-old son, which, as you can imagine, is an adventure in and of itself, and they did this in a rented sailboat. They made their way all the way from Spain in the west to Israel in the east, and along the way They stopped in France, they stopped in Corsica, Sardinia, mainland Italy, Sicily, I believe also. They stopped in Crete and the Peloponnese in Greece, and also in Cyprus, and eventually ended up in Israel. The goal originally had been to make their way all the way to Syria, but unfortunately 2011 was when the civil war in Syria first began to get going in earnest, and they were unable to complete the journey, so they had to end up in Israel. This book is partly history, it's part travel documentary, it's part food journalism. She and her family investigate the origins and the cultivation of the trees that olives are produced from, and they actually collect samples in a number of places, working with botanists along the way, because the DNA that they take from the trees allowed them to isolate particular varieties and research the history of how they were distributed throughout the Mediterranean area. Some of the trees that olives are produced from are as old as 2,000 or 3,000 years. And botanists have actually determined that olives were originally produced in the area where Angus's family is from, that Turkey-Syria area, as long ago as 8,000 years. So the fact that olives are still such an important part of the world's culture is as much a testament to their mythology as it is to the way they taste. So along the way, they taste tapenades, they taste plain olive oil, they taste it in desserts, in salads, and a variety of other ways to use olives. And of course, whole. You can't actually eat olives right off the tree, they need to be cured. So they go into a lot of the different ways that different cultures have done that as well. The neat thing also is that she includes a number of interesting just sort of tips, practical advice on how to select olive oils and olives, how to store them, how to use them in different types of cooking. And also, this is particularly helpful these days, how to understand the many different kinds of labels and grades that make it hard to know whether you're getting a good olive oil or not. So she goes into a lot of how the industry works and how you can understand that to choose olive oils for yourself. And she even tells you how to host your own olive oil tasting party, which is kind of fun. So if your book group is basically just an excuse to get a bunch of your friends together once a month and drink wine, you could always try some of her ideas. It's a way to try something, shake it up a little bit and do something different. So overall, I would say, again, this is a wonderful narrative nonfiction for people who don't normally think they like nonfiction. It reads like a novel, has a great sense of place. And for people who don't like nonfiction, I think you will really enjoy how it brings the sunny Mediterranean into your life. And I guarantee that before you're finished with it, you're going to run down to farmland and pick up either some olives or some oil to eat with your dinner. So that's Olive Odyssey by Julie Angus. I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Jeff. Karen.
I'm Karen, and my books, as you will see on the list, are all about the apocalypse. There's a couple of interesting things about the apocalypse. I think, first of all, that we really like them or we're interested in them anyway, as human beings, just because they talk about how we manage or choose or are forced to live when everything we know and love has been wiped out. And there's some interest in thinking about that. The other interesting thing I found out about apocalypse books is that they tend to be written when there tend to be spikes in the writing of apocalypse books when we are generally collectively afraid as a society. So there was a spike, for instance, in the 1950s when we were all worried about nuclear war and communism. And then there was another spike in the 1980s when we were afraid of AIDS and the threat from space, sort of Ronald Reagan's Star Wars type things. And since 2004, there's been a really big spike going on. We seem to be really scared of lots of things at the moment, from war to viruses to immigrants to genetically modified this and that. Whatever it is that the media throws at us, we seem to be frightened of. So the good news about that is that there are a lot of apocalypse books out there to read right now. And,
To make you feel better.
Right, to make you feel better about the state of the world. And I wanted to talk about a few of those today. They're sort of ones that have run a little bit more under the radar, say, than The Hunger Games or even Cormac McCarthy and that kind of stuff. So the first book I want to talk about was written a few years ago. It's called The Dog Stars by Peter Heller. And this is a book in which the starkly beautiful writing, in particular the spare, distilled descriptions of post-apocalypse Colorado are the kind of delicious icing on the cake. On the many-layered cake is the characters and the relationships that Heller builds and writes about. So I want to first introduce you to the cake, which is the characters, and start with our narrator, who is Hig, or Big Hig, as he is called. He's sort of an everyman. He's a fisherman, he's a handyman, he's a gardener. He used to be a writer when there were people that you could write for. And above all, for this story, he is a pilot, and he finds freedom and detachment from the hell of the empty landscape below by going up in his 1950s Cessna 182 little four-seater, which he calls the Beast, affectionately. And he's constantly with his beloved companion, Jasper the dog. Jasper is both an early warning system for the intruders who constantly are threatening to come through the defunct airport where Hig and Jasper live. And he's also Hig's only connection to his past life, to the life that once was. Now, Hig shares the duties of guarding the relative safety of the airport with Bangley. Bangley is a survivalist killing machine, and he's sort of a military tactician extraordinaire, and he has saved Hig's life more than once, but there's always this sort of question in Hig's mind about his sanity, a big question about his sanity. And so the two of them have this sort of strange friendship and connection that born out of necessity. And later in the story, we meet a couple of other characters who are maybe not quite as nuanced, but are still alluring. Seema and her father, who Hig calls Pops. She is a strong, beautiful doctor who is left with emotional and mental scars from the losses she has survived in the past, and he is a skilled survivalist also with a love of the land. So as Heller is describing these characters and their world in a sort of, he has quite a poetic, spare voice. And this is what sets the book apart, I think, from many of the novels in the genre, with the notable exception, of course, of Cormac McCarthy, who is the master of poetic spare apocalypse writing. But if you like McCarthy, or if you've ever liked any of it, certainly the language is something that ties these two books together. This is not nearly as dark as Cormac McCarthy, I would say. It's a little warmer and fuzzier, if apocalypse can be that. Anyway, Heller is both a novelist and a poet, and his language is definitely rooted in the down-home vernacular of the American West. And like most great American poets, he sings the song of the landscape, both its frayed and crumbling end times beauty and the thriving country that still lives in Hig's memory. Heller's descriptions in the form of Hig's first-person narration let the reader see and hear and feel the end of times Colorado. It's kind of a bird's eye, or really a Cessna's eye view of the landscape that kind of forms a map in our minds on which the action takes place. And we can zoom into locations, oftentimes literally from the air, to take part in the action. And now some of that action centers around the violence, which of course threatens Hig and Bangley every moment of every day. But there is respite from that because of Hig's own need to get away from all of that. We see him in situations where he has a relationship with some settlers who suffer from a blood sickness that keeps them isolated from the rest of, from everyone. But he flies in from the air and shares supplies with them. We see him on a fishing trip with Jasper, where he goes into the mountains, into the places where the last fish survive, and does what he loves most. We feel his joy and his freedom as he flies, and we feel the constant pull of that faint voice that he heard once crackling over the airwaves as he's flying in the Beast from Grand Junction, calling him siren-like to fly further than he knows is safe. And in fact, there is an event in the book that does finally drive him toward that voice, away from the relative safety and into the unknown. So Heller uses these situations to build and deepen Hig's character, so that by the end we feel him, having watched him in situations that range from